Domestic abuse and violence against women and children in South Africa is a stark reality and remains extremely high. Today marks the start of 16 Days of Activism campaign. We focus on abuse and look at the possible causes and psychological effects it has on the victims. Now, joining us in studio to unpack is psychiatrist Dr. Sarvani Pather. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
In terms of these short-term and long-term effects associated, walk us through what we can expect with the start of 16 Days of Activism.
So as you know, today is the start of the 16 Days of Activism, and it runs through until the 10th of December to create awareness of this stark reality. If you look at the effects of domestic violence and abuse against women and children, the effects are far-reaching. The consequences go through with the victims from childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood as well. There are the short-term effects, which is dependent mostly based on the kind of abuse that's being perpetrated. There's physical abuse, so the acute injuries, fractures, broken bones, bruises, and in terms of sexual abuse, infections, injuries as well. And then the long-term, far-reaching effects are mostly psychologically based and can also be physically based as well.
In terms of South Africa, putting it into context, what are some of the root causes that lead to these short and long-term effects? I mean, every year we're highlighting the plight of abuse, but I mean, where does it stem from at large?
Yes, so every year we have the 16 Days of Activism, and we hope that with creating more awareness of this reality, we can go through with the rest of the year being aware of this daily occurrence of abuse against women and children. Some of the causes, if you look at the causes of domestic violence and abuse perpetrated against women and children, you have to look at the individual, the abuser. Were they exposed to violence in childhood? Were they abused? Were they exposed to abuse within the home or within the community? As an adult who's perpetrating abuse, are they dealing with substance abuse? Are they substance abusers? Do they have mental health issues? Are there problems within the greater social circumstances within the community? We have communities where violence is rife, and so you're exposed to it on a daily basis, and that might also contribute to abuse going on for long periods of time if there's no intervention. If signs and symptoms of abuse within victims is not being picked up on by the greater community so that help can be sought.
And oftentimes when victims are abused, I mean, you don't know it's abuse until there's a mirror that shows you that the way you're being treated is not correct. I want to know what are some of the effects of these long-term and short-term psychological disturbances that it will have on victims, not only for these 16 days, but beyond. I mean, we can see the breakdown of society. We've seen cases the world over, top individuals who've now obviously been accused of abuse in various forms, still allegations to be proven, but nonetheless, just a mirror that something is not right.
Exactly. So when abuse, in order to seek help for abuse, you have to report the abuse, and then there are allegations that need to be investigated. The long-term psychological effects are far spread. They're far-reaching. They include depression, problems with anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. In the acute setting, it's more an acute stress response. But post-traumatic stress disorder can be a lifelong disorder that one has to deal with. Victims can often turn to substance abuse. Victims who are abused in childhood or adolescence or adulthood can all turn to substances as a way of coping with the distress, because the abuse is very harmful and distressing and affects all areas of life. Children who may be abused will then carry that aggression through into other areas. If they're abused at home or in the community, they might then become violent in school. They might then become bullies at school and be involved with bullying other children. So the consequences for the individual and the greater community is really far-reaching.
What are some of the preventative measures one can take to ensure that abuse is stopped at its root cause? And if it is, what are the signs and symptoms one can look out for just during the 16 Days of Activism period?
So we'll start with the signs and symptoms, depending on the kind of abuse that is being perpetrated. So physical abuse will result in bruising or injuries, fractures. That will be maybe noticeable to other members of the community or the victim might try to hide the injuries. So they may wear clothing that covers up the bruising. But they become withdrawn. They isolate themselves socially, a change in behavior. So either acting out behavior, anxious, fearful behavior, being very secretive about the abuse because they may be told that it's their fault and they may view themselves quite negatively and be fearful of reporting and divulging the information to other people. Apart from that is changes in behavior, like I've said, with using substances, acting out behavior, becoming involved with the wrong group of people in order to try to cope with the distress. And so we know that prevention is much better than cure. So to prevent these things from happening, especially during these 16 days, but every other day, is to empower women, is to empower children and the youth so that you're less likely to become a victim. But if you do become a victim, then you're more likely to ask for help before it becomes a chronic, it's something that's chronic that is then a way of life and you become more accepting of it. So to ask for help earlier so that you can receive help, so that the abuser can receive help, and then you can start the process to recovery.
Stigmas associated with getting help, both from the victim as well as the abuser. I wonder also along the value chain, with government, with society at large, being involved in combating this. I mean, what more can be done to ensure that this value chain is protected and in essence we stand together and unite against this?
Exactly. I think each and every one of us can do something. We have a very resource-constrained country, and we have very high rates of abuse against children and against women. But each member of society, I think, has a responsibility to assist each other with this stark reality. All healthcare professionals are obligated to report abuse and then to extend help to others. So, for example, if it's a child who's being abused at home and reports at school to an authoritative figure or a teacher that they're being abused, social services would then need to be notified so that the process can be started. It's our responsibility to do that and not to just overlook the extent of the abuse or to minimize the effects of the abuse on a child or on women.
Should people want to find out more information, receive help, just contact you for further information? How do they go about doing this? I mean, I know there are various campaigns that are running to highlight the plight of abusers and victims at large during this period, but hopefully it will extend beyond these 16 days.
Yes, exactly. So this, at the end of each year, is the start of a process, but we hope to start the new year on a better footing in terms of addressing abuse. So there are various resources. So one can contact the Akiso helpline, and the number can be found on the Akiso website.
Okay.
There's POWER, which is people opposing abuse against people opposing women abuse.
Yes.
There's FAMSA, which works with families quite closely. There's Lifeline, South African Police Services. There's SADAG, and if it's difficult for one to access those because they're fearful, you can start in your local community. So you can start with your local doctor or a community worker to help you, to assist you with accessing the resources that are there.
Thank you very much for joining us in studio today. We wish you all the best with your future endeavors. I know it's going to be a busy period during these 16 days, but hopefully the message will be spread beyond these 16 days to help empower and solidify us coming together so that we unite against the abuse.
Exactly.
Well, that, of course, was psychiatrist Dr. Sarvani Pather chatting to us about the start of 16 days of activism and just the psychological effects associated with abuse during this period and beyond.